Like the first day of marriage is going to be the last day.
Today, the dimension of relationship has changed tremendously with the advent of social media.
The way we interact with our romantic partner is pretty much the same as we interact at work.
What does actually a relationship means?
If it's a romantic partner relationship, I could be the fiance, girlfriend, wife. 4 things that really kill the relationship is constant criticism is one.
Today, Dr. Vimal taking us to the entire aspect of relationship.
We change and we bring our changed selves into the relationships, thereby relationships change.
Walking off the relationship in 2 years is too long a time. Not taking the relationship for 20 years is still achievable.
How many people who actually reach out to you for divorces?
There used to be many calls that used to come in the evening. I can hear the voice of another spouse from the background. Lot of shouting, lot of threat.
You never celebrate my birthday. We never go out. We don't travel. They look for everything on apps. Food, shopping, movies. They look for a soulmate on a dating app. Maybe at some point of time we could explore crime and law.
We will definitely. A very warm welcome to all of you. We are bringing yet another episode on discussing the relationship. Last time we had discovered and discussed about narcissism. That has attracted a lot of views and lot more comments to deal more deeply about the relationship. How does a relationship look? And that we are going to cover with our guest today, Dr. Vimal. She will be taking us to the entire aspect of relationship. Not only that, we will be covering only about the relationship. Today, the dimension of relationship has changed tremendously with the advent of social media and the life on the reads. This is all that we are going to discuss with a very warm welcome to ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for having me yet again.
Thank you so much. So last time we discussed a very detailed discussion which was more serious, more difficult. Today let's understand where everything begins, what we call as relationship. I want to understand, rather I want everybody to understand what does actually a relationship means. How do you define that?
That's a good place to begin. So we can begin with defining the relationship, because a relationship is at the very core of human existence. It is the thread that weaves us to life and to our existence on the planet. That may be romantic partnerships, that may be professional relationships, family, friends. We have a relationship with everything. We even have a relationship with money. We have a relationship with our house. But today we are talking about human relationships. So we'll talk only
So
about
let me
the
clarify.
human
Today we are
relationships.
talking about human relationship, the relationship between or of the nature of husband-wife or a romantic relationship where they go and becomes living life like that of the married people, or we can call it in a more simple way, live-in relationship. So these are the spectrum that I tried to cover. We are not getting into the other family relationship. However, we can expand the discussion at a later stage to understand more from the relationship with our work also, which we will see.
Yeah, sure. I would like to clarify here that, we take ourselves the way we are to every relationship. So it's not very different. The way we interact with our romantic partner is pretty much the same as we interact at work, with family, with friends. Of course, the nuances are different because the roles of the people are different. And also we play a different role in every relationship. For example, if it's a romantic partner relationship, I could be the fiance, I could be the girlfriend, I could be the wife. So it's defined by roles. And the roles play a very integral part in making the relationships dynamic, because relationships are very often, I think people struggle to believe that they're meant to be static. It'll remain like the first day of marriage is going to be the last day on the planet. But it doesn't work like that. Human beings are dynamic. We change and we bring our changed selves into the relationships, thereby relationships change.
When do we generally observe that a person enter into the relationship? The relationship has a generally positive connotation. It goes on the high. then how does this whole cycle goes up? There must be certain logic behind it, because it can't be something which, as a matter of fact, it happens in every person's relationship lives, that initially good, later on it has started getting normal, then bad, then worse, then again. So can you just explain me that from your angle?
So from a romantic partner relationship, or even friendships to some extent, and work, I would say, because the biological relationships you're going to shelve for a minute because the dynamics change differently, because it depends a lot on the content or the context of life, and how the aging happens, and it's a different model of relationship dynamic. However, the other three that I mentioned, it usually sets off with romance, for example. And romance is, makes you believe that we are perfect. Like, my partner is perfect and there's no one better in the world. Um, we like to believe them to how we see them. It's not necessarily the way they are. And that's how we enter the world of perfection. However, in the journey of life, change is a constant and thereby sets in reality. When reality sets in, there are little fights that happen, there are little quarrels that happen, there are certain expectations that are not met. Maybe I expect something from a role, and that expectation from that particular role is not being fulfilled, is not up to my expectation, and thereby I start reacting. I react to my expectations not being met. So there begins a cycle of reactions where the arguments go up, where the quarrels go up, where there is more negotiations happening. And also life expands, because initially in the romantic period, or even when a new friendship begins, it's all about each other. But as life goes on, more people get introduced, other contexts come into play, situations happen, and they all play a role to, I think, it's to give us insight that perfection is not sustainable, but the perfection is in embracing the imperfections of all relationships, and of situations and of people. So the reactions happen, and then there is resistance, because when there is too much change, the human mind is also very resistant to too many things happening, processing the speed at which things happen. So we resist. Resistance means we push back. Resistance means that we don't want to accept. And so the reactions tend to go up when there is a lot more resistance. There are also these times where, I would like to ask you this, I think it's the resistance phase in a relationship where people also go and say, I want a divorce. Since we are talking about relationships, romantic relationships. And other than that, maybe at a job, when there's a difficult period, when there's too much pressure, there's resistance to that pressure, is like, I'm going to quit the job. With a friend, it may be, we need to take time out because I can't handle your anxious energy, for example. However, I think we also have at the base, at the very core of us, the need to remain connected and to remain in a situation or with a person which is familiar. And that familiarity lends itself to then renegotiating whatever we are resisting, because we give it time. Or sometimes people just take time out, and then they come back, and the renegotiating kind of happens. They start to think it's not that bad, I'll manage. When they go for interviews, they may decide, but my job's okay, it's not that bad. So it kind of, you renegotiate with yourself, and that renegotiation you also bring into the relationship with the other or the situation. And then there comes a point where, and this is also, the renegotiation is also an aspect of reflection. Like we reflect and introspect. See, one of the fundamental things about life is we do not understand life as we go along it. We understand life when we retrospect, like when something's happened and we look back, we understand. But while we are going through the pain and suffering, we don't get it.
through that.
Yeah. Because we are too busy either resisting or we are trying to figure it out. And then lastly, I think there is renewal. You decide whether you will actually quit from the relationship, job, or friendship, or you stay. So there is recalibration that happens, and then you move on to the next cycle. So this is generally the cycle of relationships, if to answer your question.
So I rephrase what you have just stated. There are few stages in the relationship. Stage 1, generally when we talk about romanticism, it is the world is a perfect place. My partner can have no wrong. The second is the little bit of reality, some question mark. Third comes when there is more differences, more reality set in, resistance starts coming. Then resistance takes the shape of a little bit of anger, and then both partners in that way try to adjust with each other. One try to win the other with their way of arguing things. They are not in that reflective mode where they can understand their set of emotions, but they're just getting into it, making the initial, after some initial days, ugly days of the relationship. Then they go back, come back again to fight, go back to renegotiate. And then there comes at a later stage, depending not in terms of time, but depending upon the intensity of the differences, and the one has the caliber to deal with it. As according to that, they come, renegotiate, find a space, and then you are saying that it is at the later stage there comes a point where they draw the lines, go back, think over it, reflect it. The partner may choose to be or not to be.
Yes, because I think there's the threshold plays a part there. Each one of us has a threshold. So either we push our threshold to, we optimize the potential of our threshold, or we give into it.
Yes, and it is right so, because for many people, walking off the relationship in 2 years is too long a time, and for many people, not taking the relationship for 20 years is still achievable because they have the ability to cope it up, or may not have the strength to come out of it.
Yeah, and regardless of what the reason may be.
Correct.
I have a question here. In this cycle of relationships that we've kind of pretty much discussed in detail, where do you think, how many people who actually reach out to you for divorces follow it through?
So how many people comes to me who talks about divorce but eventually don't take the decision of divorce? Yes, there are so many cases. But when they come up, they're pretty determined people who comes up to say, no, we want to have a divorce. But if they are coming with a certain zone of uncertainty, wherein when I see from the discussion that it is nothing but a reaction out of emotions in a given situation where, as you said, they have not been able to retrospectively see them, then it becomes my job to tell them another perspective. And there are so many times when it happens that they come with a clear-cut idea of the divorce. However, the situation has not reached to the point where divorce is the solution to their problem, as I can see objectively from outside. Then I tend to advise them to go back and revisit and reflect. There are so many people who goes back and reflect their decision. They make the marriage a success, or maybe 3 years or 4 years goes down the line and they again come back, though we did try, we did do well. So this is how it happens. And often I remember, not now, but earlier, there used to be many a call that used to come in the evening, and that used to be, I can hear the voice of another spouse from the background, lot of shouting, lot of threats. So later on, when these calls started becoming way too much, I started realizing it is the evening time, it is a fight between the spouse, and one is trying to score over the other. Look, I can go to the lawyer, and look, I have spoken to the lawyer, and the empty threat of divorce dare you not give to me. So these are also the kind of the situation that I have taken to. So there are many people who are often at the verge of taking the decision to divorce, but only after some time when the whole thing sets in, they go back and do their stuff and they keep fighting, they keep renewing their agreements, as you said.
So a lot of the people, I think, come to you when they are in the reactive phase of the relationship.
Precisely. And that is where, as a lawyer, we have a responsibility to pick up those things. We are not here to fight a case,
Yeah.
to immediately file a case. All right, you are coming to me and tomorrow let me shoot a case and let me have a divorce for you. This is where we got to be very, very clear in our approach to ensure that they are being given the right advice.
Yeah, I agree with that because I follow the same value. I do think that people need to proceed with the legal course only once they have recalibrated that this needs to end and we need to go our own ways.
Correct. In my practice, what I always ensure that after hearing most of the cases, not that it is true for 100%, I tell people to reflect it completely. Take your time out, take your parents, take your friends, take your any other relationship out of the whole equation. Talk to yourself, go through things with a new perspective that I have given, and then reach a decision. A decision for the divorce, if it is coming with a 99% conviction, I am not for it. I say if you are more than 110% convinced that separation is the only solution, then I go for it. Because then you are making the people to enter into the litigation world, which is a long journey or could be a long journey if they're not settling it earlier.
Yeah, and I remember when we spoke about narcissism the last time we had this chat. I do remember that I kind of advocated for the separation because there's no potential in a narcissist to change. So of course, barring certain very obvious situations that don't have the potential to change, probably the time does not need to be allocated for the cycles of the stages of the relationship to go all the way to recalibration because
Correct.
Yeah.
So how I would generally determine when I see and hear the whole story after the entire conference, if I have the feeling that the marriage has become too toxic and the relationship has become too burdensome to live together and there's no hope, scope of any change in the other partner, then I do not agree to suggest no for the sake of being good to go and work on the relationship, because some relationships are not workable. If they are not workable, then again it is my ability to judge that and advise that and guide the people as to why I am reaching to this kind of a conclusion. So again, yeah, the normal relationship can have its ups and downs that need to be navigated through. But if it is a serious issue, personality disorder of a different level as narcissism or psychopath, all these kind of a thing, if I do pick those traits, then my advice could be very, very different. Living together may not be, then definitely the solution, even for the namesake.
And here I do feel that I think a lawyer being informed about personality types and certain mental health issues that are detrimental to remaining in the relationship is the awareness I feel that the legal system really does need to have. I know that you're interested, so you have the awareness, but not everybody does.
Correct.
And I do feel that they need to inform themselves.
Correct. I believe if you are practicing or trying to work on the family side,
Yeah.
your ability to gauge and understand the different aspect of human behavior, that is fundamental. You need to have basic understanding.
Yes. Especially if one is dealing with divorces, marriage,
Correct.
any kind of relationship.
Yeah, for that matter, even in the criminal law, the psychology is inseparable.
Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely. You need to understand the mindset of the accused, and you need to understand in criminal law why he committed what were the situation, what were the circumstances. And then as a lawyer, on any side of the field, whether it's the civil law, criminal law, or the commercial law, the ability to gauge during the cross-examination about the other person in a blink is something that helps a lot in doing your things correctly.
True. Maybe at some point of time we could explore crime and law.
We will definitely. You just said people appreciate a relationship and the mistakes that they commit only on retrospect. Now, this is a time through which we are trying to make people aware what are the red lines or the red herrings that we can spot on to work at that point of time when the relationship is slipping. What would be they and how do they pick that up?
This is of course for both the partners,
Correct.
or either of the partners.
It is.
Right?
When the relationship is going down,
Yeah.
it is going for both of them. A can be a receiver or B can be a receiver. It is from that perspective, what do they do to understand it and pick it up and try to resolve it rather than going through the same set of cycle where it leads to.
Yeah. So usually, our personalities play a very big role in how we relate to each other. So what I'm trying to say here is that our personalities lend themselves to the relational intelligence we practice, whether it's in a romantic partnership, whether it's a marriage, whether it's friends, or even at a workplace. There are some people who get more affected than other people. And one of the things to check is the question to ask is, am I really reacting all the time? Am I just reacting because I can't operate under pressure, and I'm not able to accept the changes that my role and my partner's role are playing out? Or is it that there are red flags and I'm trying to resist the red flags? Every angry quarrel, or an angry expression is a hidden wish. Behind every criticism, also there's a hidden wish. Like, I may say, "Tum kabhi time pe nahi aate ho," right? But what am I really saying? That next time, I want you to be on time. I want you to practice more efficiency when we talk about time. It would be the same for anything. You never celebrate my birthday. We never go out. We don't travel. So when this overgeneralization happens and there is this always and never and stuff attached to it, it becomes personal. So, the four things that really kill the relationship is constant criticism is one. There is stonewalling. Stonewalling means that you're just drifting away, like you're shutting down. And then there is contempt. Like, I will keep score of everything that you haven't done to my expectation. Every time you haven't come up to my expectation, and then I'm going to throw it back at you. At the time you least expect it, maybe, or at a time when you're most vulnerable. I think that's the worst of them all. That's from my own experience of having seen these four at play. And the fourth one is the defensiveness, where I will never accept my mistake. I think it's generous, it's kind, and it's also graceful to just say, yeah, I'm sorry I went wrong. And I won't do it again. That saves the relationship. Now, when it comes to work, I am not expecting a boss to say that, but maybe, the boss can just find their own words and say, all right, let's just hope that it doesn't happen again, or, something to kind of remodel and restructure the way forward. So I feel that defensiveness is a killer. Like, that's a red flag. And if in any relationship all these four are happening, that's definitely a relationship which is on the exit. It's only a matter of time.
When all four meet.
When all four are happening in a relationship.
How to pick the initial ones and then reaching out to the right people to get the right advice, to not allow to escalate it to those kind of a level where all four essentials are met.
whatever happens, the way we make the other person feel through our words and our behavior, the other person picks up, right? For example, if you walk into a room and you usually say a hello, but that particular day you don't, you pick it up. So I think that human beings are very sensitive to nuances, and any long term relationship where you are working together, you're staying together, or you're just being together, or having fun like family activities together, friends activities together, people pick up nuances. And if you're picking up nuances that are making you uncomfortable, that leave you feeling uncomfortable, that you don't, you meet the other person but you come away feeling not good about the entire interaction, those are cues. You need to sit and ponder over it. Is it happening too many times? Am I constantly feeling like the lesser one in the relationship? Because contempt also is very closely related to shame. How, it's different when I say, you did this wrong, or you could have done it better. And I say that you never do anything right. So if I'm criticizing the existence, and your potential is going to land on you very differently than saying you made a mistake, correct it. So I think that people in their gut and in their intelligence are sensitive enough to pick it up. So they will pick it up. And if it's happening, like I said, on repeat, that's definitely something to check out. I think people are also more open to therapy, so you can speak to a friend, you can speak to someone who's wiser and older in their circle, someone they trust. Go visit a therapist. So these are the ways in which one can get help, and maybe some amount of reflection as to what's really happening in the relationship.
So as I pick what you are saying, it is how we say a word and communicate our feelings and emotions that can really help people to do well in the relationship. Similarly, if an apology is coming, it has to be a meaningful apology. But if somebody is not actually apologizing but taking care of the situation in the moment just to get over with the fight, what would you say to them?
You wouldn't say anything, you would observe. And if anything for that matter is not genuine or authentic, that behavior is likely to be repeated over and over again, and you will pick it up at some point of time or the other. You would know that this, whatever is being projected is not what's real.
Now, often we see a situation in a relationship where, while being too much with each other, there comes a lot of also differences. And when the differences keep on happening for a long time, I see there is a need of definite pause on those moments. But those pause does not hit because one of the partner try to get to know why this is happening, how we resolve it. So how do we deal with this kind of a situation? Because what I believe is that some pause can solve the problem. How would you explain or clarify from your perspective?
You mean when partners are reacting and then they decide that they need to take time out, or they're reacting and they really don't know what to do? Like every conversation kind of amounts to a quarrel? Is that what you're...
No, my question is, when we have a relationship, there comes a time when either of the spouse seek pause, aloofness, being with himself or herself. Now, when one of the partners is trying to have that, the other partner is not able to understand and appreciate the same, and then they try to, why तुम गुस्सा क्यों हो, तुम वहाँ क्यों बैठ गए, तुम इस बात पे बात कर लो, कम्युनिकेट करो, कम्युनिकेशन से चीज़ें सॉल्व हो जाती हैं, this kind of a thing. Whereas the other spouse says, look, अभी मुझे टाइम चाहिए. How do you explain to the listener the reason behind it and the psychology behind it? Is it really required, or communication is always the solution to the problem?
Okay. So, when whatever the relationship is, especially in intimacy, we need to learn how to respect and accept the other person for who they are. I think I had said this right in the very beginning as well. And by saying this, what I really mean is that we go into the anatomy of a relationship. We are human, and every human being has their needs and they have cycles of development that they go through. Isolation is one of them. Just in the state of being, we all go through a phase where we just want to be. We don't want to do anything. We don't want to talk, which does not mean that you are angry with the partner. It does not mean that you are reacting to the partner. It also does not mean that you have something, you're holding a grudge towards the partner, which you're displaying with withdrawal or sulking, which is very often how it's connoted, right? That's your question. I think that both the partners need to understand and value the value of silence and isolation in a relationship, because वो बोलते हैं ना, किताब को बहुत करीब रखो तो अक्षर ब्लर हो जाते हैं, फिर दूर करने से क्लैरिटी आती है. So I think that applies to human beings as well. You need to distance, recalibrate, and come forward. That actually is a more sustainable model of a relationship. I think when couples practice that, it adds value, and it also brings a lot of joy. Because when you come out of your isolation, reconnect, you do it at will. You're not doing it because you need to do it. But I also understand where you're coming from, because this usually ends up amounts to nagging. And it worsens, the relational space, because one person's just going to, because they personalize it. One person is silent and the other partner is personalizing it and assuming it's because of me. So I think that intimacy is not always about being together, doing things together all the time. It's also about learning to manage the separateness, because they're two different individuals. And human beings are dynamic, so they're going to change. And we need to accept the changes of the other person and also look at our own changes.
Correct.
And that's how we emotionally mature in a relationship. These are, certain basic fabrics of a relationship that I think are very often overlooked. So thank you for the question.
So we have discussed about the reality of relationship and its very natural, or maybe in today's time, primitive manner. Now comes the world of social media. The world of Insta. Then earlier it used to be more Facebook, YouTube, Shorts, Reels, another world, way too big, way too wide. How is it impacting that natural relationship?
So the impact is huge, and the impact can be divided into the individual impact that it has on individual, and the impact that it has on relationships. The role of technology and social media is meant to be positive. It's meant to be motivational, inspirational. It lends itself to a lot of learning as well. However, human beings have one of the basic needs of a human being is to tell ourselves stories and to tell the other person stories. That's why we grow up reading fairy tales.
Correct.
Listening to bedtime stories from our parents. So the story that we see on social media, especially Instagram, they're curated. And we forget that aspect, that they are curated. It's not reality. It may be reality, but it's not necessarily reality. And to want to look so perfect, to want to look flawless, to want to have that in your own life, that's not your life. And your life is not necessarily bad just because you feel that is better.
Correct.
right? Because each one of us is where we belong, where we are rooted, and where we are connected. So when we try and place ourselves in someone else's world, which technology and social media is bringing to our phones and laptops and iPads, and if I'm missing any other device, it's not it's not ours. We see it, we can appreciate it, we can take ideas from it, but we don't need to own it. When we try and own it, like for example, wedding shoots, is so big. Everybody wants a Karan Johar kind of a wedding that happened on some movie, right? There are hundreds of people on that set. They're managing every crease of the actor's fall of fabric, the lighting, the breeze, the reflection. Do we have that? Do we belong to that world? It's not real. And there is beauty in reality. There is beauty in imperfection. So I think that our story needs to change to just accepting the imperfections, which makes us perfect. Because then we liberate ourselves. We don't have to live up to somebody else's expectations. Even if they are our own expectations of what life or what a certain event needs to look like. That's as far as individual impact goes. But the other is that in relationships, I think there is a lot of comparison that is happening, which is quite detrimental. Because couples look a certain way on a certain reel or certain photograph somebody's posted, and and they look perfect. They look perfect in that shot, or they're doing something perfectly in a reel. They may not be.
Correct. Because reel captures only few minutes or seconds of the day or the
Correct.
moment.
So it's bringing, I think, the effect it's having and the impact it's having is bringing around a lot of disparity, and it's also causing a lot of insecurity in the existential value of human beings and relationships. And we need to be careful, because that's not something that is happening. It's something that we are reacting to, responding to, wanting to absorb. And it's our choice. We're making a choice. We can make a different choice.
Correct. But the amount and the flow of those information or those reels keeps on continuing. How to distance yourself when it is so much so that you keep on getting every day. I mean, apart from your work, you have your screen on your hand and you see one is doing this, another is doing this, one has gone for honeymoon to such a location, and then another is just visiting another big place, and somebody is here, somebody is there. All the good shots are there. So isn't not natural to get swayed away by all those things?
It's very natural to get swayed away, but then what is the swaying away doing for you? It's also natural to question that. And it's also natural to know where to draw the line for yourself. It's important to know your boundaries. There is no harm in watching anything, but there needs to be a balance. When we lose balance, we tip over to the other side. It's hard, right? There are so many choices that we have. We live in a world of choices. Earlier, I think we had more structured lives where the decisions or the rules were made by somebody else and we just had to follow them. Today we have choices, and choices are terrifying. So because we have the choice, we can watch reels all day long. We can get influenced by them. Whatever the food be to the mind, that's what is going to become of us, right? We become what we repeat the most. And I don't mean that you need to live under a rock and not be exposed, but you can have an exposure to everything, know about everything, but you can still make the choice to do things that work for you. If watching too many reels, watching too much of social media and watching other people's life is not working for you, balance. Like, There are pizzas, there's chole bhature, there are so many fat foods. But when people go on a diet, they do know how to restrict themselves from it. They know how to practice refrain. They know how to hit the gym, right? Same thing can happen with social media. Why cannot we decide to be on a mental diet? Why can we not decide to be on an emotional diet?
Hmm.
We could be on a spiritual diet. There are 4 basic dimensions of a human being: the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Social media is only about the physical.
Hmm. Correct. They say nowadays, when earlier somebody gets married and bride comes into the home, then there used to be all relatives and everybody. And then we used to have this honeymoon created out of this whole thing so that they can have their moment of being together in a separate, distant location away from all this and that. This is how we have seen the concept of this whole honeymoon and all came into being. But today, what I am seeing is marriage takes place, then there's a fine destination, outstanding location, they go for their honeymoon, and then in that very house, of all the people, we have a WhatsApp group of all the masis and the boas and everybody. And then every picture which is taken on a foreign destination is being put here. So are we not responsible for killing our own privacy by being indulging into social media?
Absolutely, we are. But do the people really want to be private? I think there is a lot of shift in the way we want to live life publicly. We want to be seen. We want other people to know of only the good parts of us, though. How good we look. What's the outfit I wore? What's the bag I carried? What are the shoes I'm wearing? It's a lot about projecting, and I think it's also, and I'm not saying it in a negative way. I think it fulfills the basic human need of just wanting to feel validated. And because in today's life language, the physical presentation of a human being has become prime. Like that's the way, we define our identity. And that's why people want to be seen in a certain way. But it's the same people who look amazing on Instagrams that in their reality, in their homes, in the comfort of their homes, they also wear track pants and t-shirts. Which is fine, which is also a part of the same reality. So I'm not saying don't look at it, but I am saying balance it.
Correct.
Right? Like I said, I don't think, it's amazing that we have so much of exposure today. Back in the day when I and you probably were growing up, and I'm just speaking about you, I don't really know, but I think encyclopedias were the only source of information, and dictionaries. I remember when I was growing up, it was a ritual to read 10 words from the dictionary every night.
Correct. And still we try to tell this to our children.
Yeah.
And that brings me another very interesting thing. Now this Gen Z and this Alpha, all these categorization, they say, hey parents, you don't understand our world. You do not understand our language. You just do not know anything. And now you tell us to go back to the ages when we have all the things right in our hand. We say go back and develop your intellect dynamically rather by going through all the rightful ways. And they say, why do I do that? It is already prepared. Why do I go and cover a particular distance to bring the dictionary and see it when it is just a right click away? And then they feel that the parents doesn't know. And then we are questioned like, what is this? And here comes our incongruence. We see the world differently. They see the world differently. We try to bring organic things. They try to bring artificial intelligence. What is your message, or what is your take on this rather?
Transgenerationally, if you look back on the development of mankind, we have only been progressing and developing and evolving, right? But we call evolution, the evolution, I think, is really the model of evolution is very connected to technology
Correct.
and machines and the AI. Now AI, but like when I and you were growing up, it was more machines. There was a time we never had TVs at home, right? We would go to the neighbor's house
Correct.
to watch a TV, to watch Chitrahar on Sundays. There were no phone calls. We had to book a trunk call,
I remember.
right? And pay heavily for it, for a 2 or 3 minute conversation. And that too, the phone was either at a shop and the whole neighborhood knew about it. And we were just collectively sharing it, or it was in the neighbor's house,
Correct.
or in our own house where other people would come. Either way, right? That is our frame of reference of growing up. But our children's frame of reference is not that. And we are also responsible for it.
Correct.
Because we give them an iPad. We give them a phone. They have access to a lot of information which is digital. They also have access to information which we don't provide them,
Correct.
right? But that's the flip side of, like I said, it's the world of plenty. I don't think there is anything wrong, but I do think that technology has brought about a bit of arrogance in the human mind. And I think we see that in the next generation, which you are referring to, like, you don't know anything, I know it all. I think that's an attitude that's developing because it's true, isn't it, that we do know less,
Agreed.
right? I mean, my go-to for making notes is still Post-its. It's not my phone, right? I would still like to write a card and not email a card. So our frame of reference to life is different. I have no idea how this is going to progress, but I think it's again a matter of acceptance that I think the more we accept our children for who they are, the arrogance will go down. Because again, I think that arrogance is a language of pushing back. Because, we keep comparing them to the old age. Like the old age means the old times, like when we were growing up. And they don't get it. They don't understand. How many children today know what a hand pump is? I know what it is.
Do I use?
Yeah. How many people, how many children know what it feels like to sit on the floor and make the chapatis on a mitti ka tawa, on a mitti ka burner, jo bhi bolte, angithi. Chulha, haan, bolte the. Their frame of reference is, that's something that belongs in the movies for them.
Correct.
Right? But that's real for us. I think we need to just give that information to them like a story, like information, but not really make a reference with that information to make them feel guilty for what they have. I think that changes the relationship with the children because it takes away the arrogance. And why should they be guilty for what they have?
Correct. And you rightly said that we are responsible for it.
Yeah.
For example, when I see that a male is coming along with a child and he has to have interaction with me, then what is the best thing that he will offer to the child? Forget about anything, no game, nothing, just the phone or the iPad. The child can spend next 1.5 hours without disturbing the father. Similarly, a mother comes, or I may say that I've seen female is going out and indulging in a discussion with her friends and all this and that. What is the best way to allow her to mingle with her friends? Give the phone, give the mobile, give this. And I've also seen that the parents allow the children to consume food while watching iPad and this and that. And this is where we have started the whole process, introduce them, and then tomorrow when they grow up, we question them for the choices that we have imposed upon them. What do you think is the right way for today's children? those alpha and beta and gammas to have the kind of the relationship they should have with social media, so as to maintain a right balance?
It's a very tricky question because right is very different for different people.
Correct.
As a frame of reference, see, as I think for us, our generation, we need to understand that their relationship with social media is also based on needs, because they look for a soulmate on a dating app,
Okay, yeah.
right? They look for potential partners, lifetime partners, on a dating app.
Correct.
They look for everything on apps. Food, shopping, movies, some of the answers to what they are reading and educating themselves about as well. So I don't have an answer to how one can balance that. I do think that over a period of time, when the dependability on the digital information grows out of proportion, that's a time where people usually kind of wake up and want to experience more, because what the digital world takes away from us is the human experience, right? It's the human experience of, like, this, me and you sitting here having a conversation face to face is very different than having a conversation online. Both are possible. Yeah.
Paradoxically, everybody seeing us on that very platform.
Correct. So, and again, it's not wrong, but I guess if we were having this chat, let's say 10 years ago, we'd probably have it in a theater, like, in one of the conference rooms or on a panel discussion, and then there would be active audience. It may or may not even be recorded.
Correct.
Right? But today, I don't think there is anything which is not recorded. Even things that are not meant to be recorded.
Correct. Clearly.
Right? So, we just live in a very different world. It's hard to wrap your head around it. There are good things and there are bad things that come out of it. There are very destructive things that emerge from it as well. But I think as an individual, it's our individual responsibility and accountability to the kind of relationship we would like to have with social media and technology. Because now I have a question for you, something that just came to my mind. How many people who come to you seeking a divorce have a phone involved in them? Like, everything begins with that phone which was left unlocked, that laptop which was left unlocked, and someone discovered something.
Oh.
Which culminated into the disintegration of a relationship.
I think the volume would be high. It is not something that I can count on my fingertips. It is something much more than that. Very often, we see that somebody just logged in from his partner's laptop and forgot to sign out. Reaches the information, reaches the photo, reaches the message, read those emails, and then comes there a blast that happens in the relationship, which is otherwise kept as a closely guarded secret thing. So the technology now that is being used, maybe sometime I feel there are few flirting moments which would otherwise could have been hidden, comes out, and then it magnifies to a level where it really comes to questioning the entire existence of the relationship, as if that particular event or scene is all the thing which has happened, and that brings Certainly, a lot of challenges. Not one, but many examples are floating around me where this has happened, where this has become the point of the dispute, where it has led to the people in the court, and a lot has happened. And not only that, I also see another very interesting thing. Now there is a language that everybody is speaking, the language through WhatsApp, through social media apps like these stories and this and that. Now initially they celebrate their moment, they tell the world about it. And then comes a time where the relationship is going towards me, say so.
Mhm.
And this is where they get very confused about their social media identity. And that is where, when one of the spouse says, look, he's blocked me on that particular thing, he's blocked me, he's blocked my family, he's removed me from the family group, or I have been muted in the family group, now he is exited. There's a new language of the relationship which is happening, and which is really a matter of a significance, or a matter of concern for me.
Yes, I get to hear that as well a lot.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think it's that language which also plays in deciding the fate of that relationship. Because being blocked is considered humiliating and disrespectful. And I also think that it's also used as a language to say that we are not together anymore.
Correct.
But it could also be anger. It could also be an impulsive response because people also get added back.
Correct.
So it also sends mixed messages.
Precisely. But
And obviously, we are having a general conversation, so I'm just kind of covering all the aspects.
correct.
I mean, it would be individual.
Yeah, but the entry and the exit in multiple groups is a choice, and is a way of a reflection how people are reacting.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pressure, and also,
Confusion.
yeah,
Lot
More-
of confusion.
correct. More confusion than pressure. That's the right word.
Because I do get questioned as to what does this mean? I don't know what it means.
Correct.
I think it also depends on the way the couple or the partners communicate on WhatsApp generally, and what it's culminating into. Like, is it a pattern of behavior which is out of the box, or is it a pattern of behavior that's pretty much in the box and it's on repeat? But yes, it's hard to decode it.
Correct.
It's very hard for someone else to decode it as well.
Because that is their own unique language through which
Right.
they
Yeah.
are talking, or they have been talking, and now they have stopped talking, and therefore they have to decode it, not the lawyer me or the therapist you.
Yes.
Correct.
And it's hard to verify it as well.
Precisely.
In fact, that brings me to another question. So how much of the evidence that you get, for example, someone who's really convinced to go through a divorce or maybe even a custody battle, how much of the evidence do you get which is digital?
I think today's time, the only way, we used to have the difficulty how to bring the documented part in the domain of the court for its appreciation to understand about the relationship. But today it has become very easy to pick up all those pictures from the social media of everybody posting on what moment, what seconds, what emotions under those high moments, or on some ordinary moments, sharing moments with a friend, going to one place or another. All these things gets catalogued in our matrimonial cases more specifically. And this is where a lot of things that started coming up with. And so I tell a story which is of some relevance to make the question more clear, or my answer more clear. So I was cross-examining a man who has relied upon a lot of Facebook pictures of the time of the separation and also the time of the death of his father, wherein the spouse was in another city and there is this lot of things have happened. And at that point of time of the separation, she has posted a lot of things on the social media. And he relied upon all those things. Look, I was in agony, I was in pain, I was all in my solitudeness, whereas you were having fun. Look at this picture, look at this picture, then the timeline from the Facebook all comes through. And from the picture which is emerging from those things is making me believe, yeah, look, what he's saying is right. But then I have to cross-examine him. Then I asked 2 questions to him. I have asked a question, do you have a Facebook account? He said yes. मैंने कहा, can you tell me your ID? He gave that, unaware of course what I was to ask. Then I said, how many photos of yours that you have uploaded when you were sad, disappointed, dejected or defeated in life? Have you posted any pictures? He said no. I got my answer. So that could be the value of the social media, because we upload all the things which are of good times. We don't upload that today, look, I'm so depressed, disappointed, my wife had beaten me or my husband had beaten me. Unless we want to go to the tamasha at
Unless we want to create that.
that tamasha at a later stage, which we have seen in many celebrity cases.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, I think it's a paradox of the reality and virtual reality, and it blurs the lines between the two.
Precisely. Why there is so much of a need to be in the relationship, despite the fact that it goes way too bad, too ugly, still people try to work out, as you said initially, they try to go out, reflect back, and then come back again to the relationship. If relationship is causing so much pain, why shouldn't somebody be liberated? Why there is a need for it, so much so?
There is an existential need to connect. Human beings have a basic need to connect. We look for connectedness, we look for belongingness, we look for rootedness. When, as a baby, we're born into the world, we learn about attachment through the first primary caregiver, which is the mother, and the secondary caregiver, which is the father. So we learn to relate. If, supposing me and you were just brought up in a room which is dark and we had no human interaction, we wouldn't have much of a personality, because our intrapsychic processes are reflected in the interpersonal relationships, which makes our existence worthwhile. Even if we go through pain, even if we go through suffering, even if the relationships don't work. And this is why people, they also get married several times. Like if one marriage fails, another happens, right? Because the need to connect, to find that connectedness, is at the core of human existence. So that is why, because it's a fundamental human need to connect, and that is why we have relationships, to answer your question in crisp. Yet I do feel that it's also essential to have relationships, because all the inner contradictions and who we are, the questions we have as to who we are, our identity, who we want to become, comes through relationships. Because all the interactions that I have at my workplace, all the interactions I have with family, friends, my romantic partnerships, they reflect, we are constantly learning and growing in relationships. Because we also get feedback. When somebody says something to us, there are many times that we also learn from that feedback. We become the next better version of ourselves through that. Of course, it hurts. Of course, we go through pain. But then pain also is the tool to change us. And it empowers us in many ways. When people go through betrayal, they emerge stronger. They learn who to trust and who not to trust. but they wouldn't be able to see. We learn trust only when we go through distrust. We learn about love when we go through loss, right? We learn about connectedness when we feel amazingly disconnected. That's how I will know that I have that need. We learn about the search for my truth, my calling, when I feel I have a void and I don't have one. Otherwise, I wouldn't know it. So existential values is why. And I think that evolution happens through relationships as well. Especially in today's world, I think relationships is all about who I am rather than what I'm going to do in the relationship, because it's very centered around whose wife I am, which family I go to, how the other person sees me. So and I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it is what it is. There's a lot of identity which is centered around marriages, which is centered around the friends we have, which is also centered around work. Because earlier in the day, we would just say, "Ye job mili hai, ye mera kaam hai," and there were no questions asked. There was no there was no decoration which was attached to the kind of work we did. But today we do look for the decorated work. It makes us feel better because our identity is connected to who we are choosing to become. I'm not sure whether I have the right words to express it, but I'm trying to differentiate between how attached we are to the roles we play. And so our identity gets confused with it. And this is why we also suffer so much, because when a relationship fails, so to say, it's not a failure. It's just that the two personalities being together are not working. There is no such thing as a relationship failure or a marriage failing. You just need to learn better. Maybe we don't practice the tools or the language that the other partner understands, or we need to learn how to understand the other partner, either way, or a bit of both. But it's not about success and failure. It's about coming together. It's about learning to manage the separateness. And so we respect and accept each other better. But one of the factors that I find chronically missing in today's relationships is respect. Because we have so many expectations from the other person, which also means that we don't respect limitations.
So during the entire conversation, we have covered various aspects of relationship. We have also included the child in our discussion. We have included the Gen Z in our discussion. Now, overall, how to protect the relationship to avoid the increasing rate of divorce in a society like ours? What would be your advice?
I think as human beings, we need to feel responsible enough to learn that relationships is a dance of attachment of ourself to the other, whether the other is a situation, a friend, a family member, a romantic partner, or work. And we need to understand that we dance around with this attachment because we need to learn and grow from it. And if we just change that perspective, which means that we take it seriously, but we don't need to suffer through it. We need to be a little bit more accepting of the diversity, of the dynamics and the change that the situation or the person goes through the journey of life. And we also need to be aware of the changes that we go through and just accept it. Because I think too much attention being paid to all the things that don't work in a relationship don't work for a relationship. and they don't work for us, because then we get hooked onto holding grudges, we get hooked onto holding criticism, we get hooked onto something we humans enjoy the most is holding power over the other person and keeping score. And I think if we decrease all this, we would learn how to enjoy the relationship, because ultimately it's about the companionship and the togetherness to do activities together. But we don't need to necessarily be like each other, and we don't need to blame, shame, or try and fix and change the other person to do that. We just need to accept, we need to cooperate, we need to collaborate.
So, just to conclude the whole session, it's like maths, where in the division, there comes a situation where there is no solution, no perfect solution. There is always a remainder and a question in point until infinity, and where we say it is no more solvable. So we have to draw that particular line. Leave it there.
It's solvable, but it needs us to change our perspective and interpretation of the relationship, each relationship that we want to preserve, to decide the longevity of it.
Correct.
It's a choice.
Correct. And that is also the ultimate message of this show.
Mhm.
Exercise your choice cautiously. Be it in the perfect world, be it in that super perfect world of Insta and all that. Exercise your choice. There is content available. All kinds of content. Choose your content wisely.
Correct.
Thank you so much. I have at least learned a lot, and I'm sure my audience has learned a lot. Looking forward to a lot of comments from you to keep curating more and more meaningful content. Thank you so much.
Thank you.